There hasn't been an Armored Core game in nearly 10 years, and in most cases, when a new game from a historic series comes out after a long hiatus, it's usually a reboot or something entirely new. But for Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, it's nothing like that. Sure, it might have a fresh coat of paint and some new wheels, but the core mechanics of the game are fundamentally the same from Armored Core 4 Answer. Armored Core 6 is an amazing game, but it's because of this brilliance that I am so harsh on the game's shortcomings, and I want the subsequent entry into the Armored Core series to be even better, because these games are so unique and special in the gaming industry landscape that is plagued and filled to the brim with open worlds, first-person shooters, and live service titles. In this video, I will review Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon and explain how the game could have been even better than it already is. To begin with, the missions in Armored Core are very good. They offer a good variety of things to do, and they follow a rough story structure that the other games did not. For example, the game begins with an introductory mission that teaches the players the basic controls and lets them explore a much bigger mission area than the average mission would allow, in an attempt to familiarize the player with the mechanics that are the backbone of the entire game, piloting the Armored Core and fulfilling mission objectives. This opening mission ends with a tutorial boss, reminiscent of the way that the Soul series, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring ended their tutorial areas. However, in Armored Core 6, you do in fact have to beat the boss, which is a problem, but I will get to that later in order to keep this video organized. After this intro mission, the game gives you jobs that slowly escalate in significance with the growth of the reputation of 621, the person you play as and the game's protagonist. This isn't as important as I make it out to seem, but it is nice in my opinion to get the feeling of becoming someone important in this giant game that the corporations of Rubicon are playing. Compared to Armored Core 4 Answer, where you are almost immediately taking down arms forts, and I know that you basically take down an arms fort in the first chapter, but it is, in this case, different, because it's like taking on a suicide mission just to get some notoriety, instead of the corporations going out to get a fresh mercenary and asking them to go take down one of the most powerful weapons in the world in the arms fort. However, like I said, it doesn't matter much because it just makes completing missions and getting access to more important tasks more gratifying. The missions in Armored Core 6 are very diverse and are ordered in a way that makes them feel fresh and unique when you play them. For example, in the first chapter, the first two missions are simply going to a place and destroying a target, which for the first missions in the game is good because it lets new players and veterans of the series get fully accustomed to the quirks of the game and lets them practice for the harder missions that will be given to the player after this. In this case, it would be attacking the Dam complex with two other armored cores, and depending on which version of the mission you get, having to fight either one or two armored cores. This is the first time that the player would have fought an armored core in the game, and it is a good introduction. This is what I'm trying to say. The main mission in the game is simply destroying a target, because that's what armored cores are. War machines specifically designed to destroy. However, the game gives the players chances to partake in other activities such as finding crash sites in a specific time frame, defending an objective, or exploring a large area. The missions do a good job of keeping the players interested and keeping the game fresh. Another thing I want to mention is the quality of the presentation of these missions. In the Armored Core series, the player would always get a debrief before a mission to preview what the mission is about and accurately prepare for it. From Software has always done an excellent job in these presentations, but for Armored Core 6 I feel that it's the best they have ever done. Everything from the style they are using to present these mission briefings to the little details depending on the setting of these missions, like crackling noises from the radio transmissions if you are in an area that's hindering radio waves. The presentation of these missions is fantastic and makes me sit through the briefings multiple times because they are so clean and fun to watch. It makes you feel like an actual mercenary preparing to ship out on another mission. While I'm on the presentation, I might as well rave about the cutscenes and the general art direction of the game. Long story short, it's fantastic. Nothing short of that, fantastic. The way the burnt skies of Rubicon loom over the snowy lands of the central ice field really makes you feel that you're on a planet which is being fought over by the corporations because of their insatiable greed. On top of the great environmental design, the Armored Core part designs are very detailed and all are gorgeous, except for the one that looks like an alien, but I also mount that to the personal preference rather than ugly design. The cutscenes are also another high point, with great cinematography and excellent camera work to really emphasize key moments. The one I'll always remember is the cutscene of the PCA warship Fleet first appearing in Chapter 3, and the camera zooms into the PCA logo and makes the PCA seem very dangerous and powerful. However, once you start playing the missions, it's obvious that the PCA is actually incompetent and gets rolled by an independent mercenary. Overall, I personally think this might be one of the best looking From Software games yet, competing with Elden Ring and Sekiro. Getting back to the topic of missions, When you complete the game for the first time and start New Game Plus, you get access to missions that are not available in your first playthrough. This is common practice in the Armored Core series because the games are built around being very replayable. I do enjoy that these missions are harder and offer a challenge even after you beat the game. Another thing I enjoy is that some missions you have already played receive some variation, and even one mission in particular having a different objective due to the player choice. This mission is Attack the Dam Complex, which I referenced earlier, which sees the player attack a Rubiconian dam facility with 2 red gun AC pilots. However, in the New Game Plus, the player is offered a choice to attack and destroy the 2 accompanying ACs for the Rubicon Liberation Front. These changes to the missions make replaying the missions even more rewarding because it offers the player new challenges and scenarios to overcome. All in all, the missions in Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon are the best in the series because of the variety and replayability they provide to the game that is dependent on the quality of its missions. I would even consider these missions to be perfect if it weren't for the bosses. Armored Core has had bosses in the past before. Some were typical bosses like in Armored Core Project Phantasma where you fought Phantasma. And even back then, this boss is seen as a pain in the ass because it goes against what Armored Core is all about, playing the way you want to play. Armored Core is probably one of the most open-ended games in terms of how to solve a problem. It is almost like an RPG in the sense where you can play how you want and tackle problems how you deem fit. This dynamic excels in missions because you get a briefing beforehand and you get to modify your AC to best fit the situation. But that didn't mean that you had to entirely change the design of your mech, but outfit it with certain parts that help you accomplish your goal. And even if you did want to change your AC entirely to help you finish the mission, then that was a choice because you could handle it any way you deemed fit. Some methods were easier and more efficient, but you could get it away with it using what you want if you had enough skill. The bosses in Armored Core 6 can be beaten with enough skill, but that's like saying I can climb a mountain with my bare hands instead of just using the roads and driving to the top. Not only are the bosses not fun because they feel far too one-sided and removes any and all illusion that you're piloting a robot of mass destruction, but also because if you don't want to bash your head into a wall for hours, then you have to resort to using the counter to that boss. The tutorial boss and the PCA captain boss fights are the exception because the helicopter boss fight that has a lot of cover that can be used to not take damage, and the PCA captains are just slightly faster ACs which make them fun fights. I personally really enjoy the PCA captain fights because they offer a challenge that can be overcome with reasonable amounts of skill and no head bashing involved. For every other boss, however, there is no enjoyment out of fighting them, and I would enjoy just fighting other ACs like it was done in the past, or fighting something along the lines of the PCA captains. Enemies that resemble ACs but they are slightly heightened and allow the player a true test of skill and not have to rely on tactics that they otherwise would never employ. I will now go into every boss that I have fought and describe its faults. The first boss, the AH-12HC helicopter, is the tutorial boss, and like I said, it's the closest thing to a curated fight in Armored Core 6 because the player does not have access to the part shop or assembly in the opening level, and even replaying this mission, your current AC is overridden by the mandatory AC that the game provides the player, meaning that this fight is a test on the player if they understand the basic mechanics and can exploit the helicopter's ACS overload, which can be manipulated fairly easily. However, the problem with this fight is that it's far too difficult for a tutorial boss, especially if the player has never touched an AC game before, which is more likely than not the situation. And taking into account that the fame that From Software has garnered in the last decade, there's a lot of fans that never even knew what Armored Core was. So imagine they're going into this game and fighting this boss. It is ridiculous to expect that the average player can beat this without looking up a tutorial or guide. The only reason why I beat it is because of my experience with 4 Answer. Next up is the HAT-102 Juggernaut that you fight in Operation Wall Climber with V4 Rusty. It's approaching acceptable boss territory, but the first time you fight it, you might confuse the mines that he drops when skirting around the floor for the red lights that are present in the boss arena. Also, the boss is not fun because it's just you shooting at its back and getting ACS overload for the whole fight, and it even becomes tedious when he backs up into a corner and you can't shoot his backside. Next up is the AAP-07 Baltius, which is a horrible boss fight because it gives the player 2 choices: either use plasma weapons or have one of the most tedious boss fights of your entire life. Just switching to plasma weapons is alright. It may have an effect on your AC's energy and you might have to change a few parts around to suit the new weapons, but in the second phase, Baltius releases a fire sword that is almost impossible to dodge unless you have a super light AC. This just makes fighting him a pain in the ass. Not to mention that the Baltios fight is preceded by somewhat engaging fight with MTs and laser turrets, and a fight with a reasonably strong AC. This means that if you don't have the necessary parts to tackle Baltios, then you have to restart the whole mission again, which is not that big of a deal because the missions are all of very high quality, but it makes the fight even more tedious. Baltios is the first boss that really is more of a damper on the game than a welcome addition. Next up is EC0804, Smart Cleaner, which is more of a gimmick fight than anything because the boss takes a lot of ACS damage on the opening on the top of its design, which means just hovering above the arena and shooting into it and spamming the AC overload on the boss. This is not engaging and punishes people who like playing on the ground because the boss is also armored in the front like the Juggernaut, which just makes for a tedious fight. This is also at the end of the fairly long mission, so the same problems of the Baltios fight apply. IA-13 Sea Spider. It's also another nightmare for players that like playing on the ground because the attack it sends are very fast and it can close the distance and just one-shot you in a single attack, which I will speak about more later. Other than that, the boss once again is just trying to spam the ACS overload, and the second phase has a fun attack that you might have to jump into the air to dodge it, which I like. But other than that, the boss is not fun for me and more of a hindrance than anything. The next three bosses are the game's best in my opinion, other than the PCA captain fights, and the worm, the ice worm, which is only fun the first time. The AA-602 Cataphract, IA-02 Iceworm, and AA-P03 Enforcer are all fights that have multiple builds that are viable and don't make the fights a grueling nightmare. The Cataphract tests the player's positioning, and since the mission is just destroying the Cataphract, it can be backed out just fine to buy more parts. The Iceworm is a test of timing and patience, and is also a spectacle to behold the first time around. And the Enforcer is probably the toughest boss that doesn't teeter on being straight nonsense. However, it does reside at the end of a fairly long mission, so it has that going against it. But other than that, these three bosses are the best in the game because they test players' skills at a reasonable level without too much frustration. However, the next three bosses are simply so ridiculous that I have no idea what the developers were thinking when designing them. IB-01 Cell 240, the boss of the mission where you reach the coral convergence, is so needlessly difficult that it promotes the use of cheap tactics just to spam the ACS overload and kill the boss as quickly as possible. This isn't a good boss. Playing the boss with anything of a super lightweight reserve joint AC is short of impossible. Only the best of the best can actually beat it, which means that using a super heavy tank based AC with dual chain guns trying to spam the ACS overload is the only option that the majority of players will have. In a game all about choosing how you want to play and maximizing the potential of your AC, this just goes against that philosophy. The PCA captain fights along with the AC fights are the best in the game because the playing field is almost even. The enemies have roughly the same weapons and parts that you have available, and it's just a matter of if you can beat them with a matter of reasonable skill. It is the same problem with Elden Ring and Malenia. Malenia Blade of Mikola is so hard that it teeters on impossible for the average player unless using a strategy that can be easily abused to mitigate the difficulty of the fight. I won't go into detail about what makes Malenia such a bad boss in terms of Elden Ring, but it's the same principle, making the boss so needlessly hard that it makes the game worse. This goes for the final bosses for the two main routes of the game, IB-07 Soul 644 and All Mind. These bosses force the average player, which should be the priority of any game, the average player, the majority of the player base, to look up guides and builds in order to beat them. A test of skill so unnecessarily high that only the most skilled of those can have a chance of beating. And why does All Mind need so many enemies in his fights? Both phases are gank fights. I don't understand what they were thinking. To conclude, Armored Core 6 is the best in the game in the series, but only after you remove the boss fights that just drag the game down from what it can truly be. In my opinion, the game should have prioritized missions instead of bosses, which it sort of does, but to an extent, the bosses are still really annoying and really bad. Like, I don't understand what they were thinking. Like, why? After delving into the bosses, I believe it to be appropriate to talk about the balance in the game, although this is subject to change with patches that From Software releases. This will be more of an indication of the strength of certain parts in the game. To begin, the reverse joint leg part provides ample jumping height and distance, but the fact that the reverse joint legs cannot hold a lot means that you'll be running light parts, which should be fine if that didn't mean that you will be getting stun locked by the AC overload every 5 seconds. That makes bipedal a better option because it is much more energy efficient and overall can produce higher boost speeds and higher quick boost speeds. This makes reverse joint legs almost irrelevant because the weapons that can be run on such low weight capacity pale in comparison with what you can equip with a middleweight AC. Usually. However, I am aware of the dual Zimmerman shotgun meta, and I have used it. I will admit, I've used it. The quad legs and tank threads don't have the ability to shoot back weapons while moving, so I don't understand the purpose of running them. However, the tank threads do provide incredible defense at the cost of mobility, as is the logical trade-off. I'm still not running them though. However, I couldn't see the benefit of running quad legs outside the certain situations. This leads to the AC fights and the quality of these fights in Armored Core 6. I'm happy to say that these fights are very satisfying in Armored Core 6 because of the healing mechanic given to the players is also shared in some instances with the enemy AC, which creates longer and more tense fights. Overall, I think it's a pretty good addition and I very much like it. It's not like Armored Core 4 Answer where if you had a fight with an AC, it could be over within the matter of 10 seconds. AC fights are a major part of the arena, and in Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, the arena is the biggest in any mainline entry for Armored Core, with 45 fights in the arena, and provides a glimpse into the variety of the ACs the players can build. Some are pretty bad. Instead of having the full 45 matches open to the player at once though, the game rations the player with arena matches for the first playthrough up until rank 1 out of 30. With the additional 15 matches being unlocked similarly in the New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus playthrough. At first, I did not like this because when I was frustrated with the main missions, which I was a lot, specifically the bosses, I couldn't switch to the arena when I wanted to and actually partake in the activity that I wanted to do in the game. However, upon reflection, I can say that rationing the arena matches does create a sense of build-up to the rank 1 pilot and makes it seem like a pretty big deal when in reality it doesn't have much weight upon the main story and mechanics of the game. However, it does provide the player with OS chips that can be used to tune the mech even further. In Armored Core 4 Answer, the players were given OS chips that were used to give further boosts to their ACs after certain missions were completed. But in Fires of Rubicon, the players were rewarded with OS chips after completing arena matches, which does give the player a gradual gain in strength as the story progresses. However, the player is not able to fully max out every OS category into New Game Plus, in which case the remaining OS chips that the player may have stored serve no purpose. One of the OS categories is improving the efficiency of provided repair kits. Repair kits are a new addition to Armored Core franchise, and I have a wild theory that I will not spend too much time on, but I believe they have added health kits in order to divide the health into thirds and make getting one-shotted or being close to one-shotted a much more frequent thing. Looking at Elden Ring, it's very easy to get one-shotted by bosses or enemies when you make a big mistake, and I believe that they wanted the same dynamic of punishing the player severely for making mistakes. In addition, this relates to the bosses, but I believe that it would have made much more sense to get one-shotted by a boss when you only have 9,000 AP compared to the 27,000 that you would normally have. This is just a theory of mine, but I believe that From Software wanted to keep up their misguided reputation of being extremely difficult. The last thing I want to talk about is the story of Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon, which in my opinion is alright. Armored Core 6 was never known for its detailed and riveting storytelling, but this entry in the series follows the approach of storytelling of the older Armored Core games such as Phantasma, where it attempts to tell a linear narrative from the missions you play. There is decent character development, especially the characters that you thought would only treat you poorly or would only be, static characters. I don't want to mention specifics because the game is new and spoiling narrative beats would be a disservice, but the story that is told is more than enough for an Armored Core game. I think it does its job. Also, the game having new missions and endings on subsequent playthroughs encourages to play the game more and see these endings out. In conclusion, this is straight off the dome, no script. I think Armored Core 6 is a fantastic game. I think everyone should try Armored Core 6, but be aware that there is some bullshit involved in Armored Core 6. The bosses specifically. However, even after all this, I think this is one of the best games I've played all year. This is probably one of the best games I've played in the last 3 years. I haven't played much games though, so. However, I do like Armored Core 6. I think it's better than Armored Core 4 Answer, but just barely. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I hope this video did shed some light on why you should play Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, because I think everyone should experience this game because it is a good game. At the end of the day, it's a good game. It has no microtransactions. It's mission based. It's easy to replay. It's a fun, good old time. However, the bosses do hinder that fun a little bit. But what's a little rain on the parade, if not life? You know. Anyway, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, I guess. And yeah, goodbye.